At Starbound, we tell stories the human way, not with artificial voices or AI garbage. What's HFY without humanity? Subscribe to keep it that way. I'm Daniel Pierce, and I'm going to be your narrator. Now, let's begin. Chief Exosurgeon Hestian believed that to comprehend a system's malfunction, one must first possess an intimate familiarity with its components. He floated a slender, four-jointed finger toward the human specimen laid out on the dissection slab, his voice a meticulously modulated baritone that resonated through the laboratory. The specimen, a male marine designated Contaminant Alpha, was a byproduct of the initial pacification effort on the mudball world below, a messy but ultimately valuable acquisition.
"Observe closely, Alkalite Peer,"
Hestian intoned, the low thrum of his voice calibrated to complement the ship's ambient frequencies.
"It is imperative we establish a baseline for this organism's crude architecture. Only then can we fully appreciate the exquisite simplicity of its systemic collapse when deprived of sustenance."
Peer stood a regulation 2 paces back, his own silver tunic a testament to antiseptic perfection. His smooth alabaster face was a carefully constructed facade of scholarly curiosity, though his gaze kept flicking to the specimen's excessive facial hair with a hint of revulsion.
"Its external configuration is a litany of inefficiencies, Chief Exosurgeon. The redundant manual digits, the disorganized placement of its primary sensory organs, the baffling bilateral symmetry." "Mere surface-level vulgarities,"
Hestian corrected, his tone patient, like a teacher explaining a simple concept to a slow-learning child.
"The true architectural depravity lies within."
He selected a plasma scalpel from a floating tray. Its cutting edge was a silent, contained thread of pure energy. With a movement of fluid grace, a gesture he had refined over centuries of dissections, he traced a line from the marine's sternum to his navel. The sterile air, previously scented only with recycled oxygen and atomized cleansers, suddenly thickened with the coppery organic announcement of hemoglobin, a wet, primal odor. Peer's olfactory vents constricted in a reflexive spasm of disgust.
"Our own digestive core, a marvel of biomechanics, processes nutrients with absolute conversion and zero waste."
Hestian lectured, his voice swelling with the pride of a being who considered digestion a solved equation.
"The Terran system, by contrast, is a primitive chemical sludge vat. It's a churning, acidic cauldron of biological noise, a testament to evolutionary corner cutting."
He deactivated the scalpel and set it on a magnetized plate with a soft click. He reached into the abdominal cavity, his gloved fingers, designed for manipulating cellular structures and weaving microstructures, closed around a slick, coiled tube. The soft, wet sound it made as he lifted it seemed to cling to the sterilized air, a defiant echo of life in a place designed for its absence.
"This,"
he announced, holding up a loop of the small intestine as if presenting evidence of a crime,
"is the primary absorption apparatus, a needlessly convoluted and moist organ."
He lifted, anticipating the extraction of a modest, self-contained length of tissue. He expected a few feet at most, a reasonable length of an organism of this size. The organ, however, spooled out from the body like a runway cable, a pinkish coiled rope that he began to lay on the sterile tray beside the slab. He arranged the first loop neatly. Then the organ kept spooling. He added a second loop, then a third. The pile on the tray grew from a tidy coil to a disorganized mound, then a heap. His elegant arrangement fell into disarray. Peer, whose composure was his most prized asset, took an involuntary step backward. His sculpted face, a moment ago a mask of academic interest, now betrayed a flicker of raw horror. The sheer volume of it was obscene. It was anatomically gratuitous. Hestian's own serene composure began to fracture at the edges. His movements lost their fluid grace, becoming jerky and agitated, like a programmer wrestling with a tangled nest of fiber-optic cables. He tugged, and another yard of the organ emerged, slick and seemingly without end. The pile grew larger, spilling over the tray's edges and slapping onto the pristine white floor with a soft, wet sound that made both of them flinch. This wasn't just biology. It was a physical insult. It violated every known principle of elegant minimalist design. How could any sentient creature function with this much internal plumbing? It was the biological equivalent of a starship made entirely of exhaust pipes. He yanked again, harder this time, a flash of raw frustration shattering his clinical detachment. Another meter of the organ slithered free, uncoiling with a defiant squelch. He stared at the obscene heap of tissue, a mound of guts that now covered a significant portion of his lab floor. He glanced back at the half-empty cavity of the human, then at the pile, and the very foundation of his biological understanding began to shudder. This wasn't just inefficient. It was a deliberate architectural affront to reason itself. This creature contained more intestine than was strictly decent. He dropped the length he was holding back into the pile with a grimace. His voice, when he finally managed to speak, had lost its condescending hum. It was a low, baffled hiss of disbelief, a sound that sliced through the sterile atmosphere and left a wound.
Why is it so long?
Sergeant Maria's consciousness returned in a wave of throbbing pain, a fog of confusion, the lingering metallic aftertaste of a stun blast. She was on a cold floor, a seamless metallic floor that felt like it was actively leaching warmth from her body. Her head pounded with a rhythm that suggested a platoon of heavy-booted infantry was marching through her skull. A quick, systematic inventory, habit ingrained through 100 hostile environments. All limbs present and accounted for, though each one was filing a loud formal protest. No immediate signs of catastrophic injury. She pushed herself up, her vision a swirling vortex of gray. The room slowly solidified into a perfect cube of monolithic, featureless metal. There were no visible seams, no bolts, no rivets. Every surface flowed into the next in a chilling monument to sterile perfection. The effect was profoundly disorienting, a space that offered the eyes no purchase. Yet the minimalist design had its flaws, tiny interruptions in its oppressive uniformity. A narrow slit near the floor served as a waste disposal unit. High on one wall, a ventilation grate hummed a low, monotonous tune. A single pipe, slick with condensation, ran along the base of another wall, and near the floor, almost invisible against the gray, was the faint hairline outline of a service panel.
My head feels like I used it to tenderize a steak.
A deep voice groaned from nearby. Corporal Gibson was rolling onto his side, his massive frame looking absurdly cramped and out of place in the sterile box. He blinked his large, gentle eyes, which then unfocused as his hand went instinctively to his stomach.
And worse, I'm hungry.
Vitals are stable, a calmer voice stated. Specialist Anika was already sitting up, her fingers pressed against the pulse point in her neck. Her expression, one of detached clinical assessment. Minor cranial trauma, concussive force is consistent with their energy weapons. Nothing a few hours, a ration pack, and a full night's sleep won't fix.
A fat chance in the ration pack part.
Gibson rumbled, pushing himself to a seated position. His stomach punctuated the statement with a gurgle so loud it echoed in the small space. It was a wet, defiant, thoroughly biological sound in his tomb of silent technology. Focus, Maria said, her voice a low rasp that scraped her throat. Where are we? A holding cell, Sergeant. Anika answered, her eyes taking in the oppressive uniformity with an analytical sweep. A Lorian design philosophy. Minimalist, efficient, and psychologically demoralizing.
And hunger-inducing,
Gibson added, patting his stomach as if to quiet it. As if summoned by his complaint, a section of the wall in front of them wavered like a heat haze. A hologram resolved into the image of an Aularian. It was tall and willowy like the ones they'd fought. its silver uniform melting into the gray background. It had no discernible face, just a smooth, ovoid head that tilted with an unnerving lack of anatomical necessity. A translated voice as cold and sterile as the room filled the air. "You are subjects in a study of Terran deprivation tolerance." "Oh, goody," Maria muttered under her breath. "Science experiment. I was hoping for a firing squad." "Your biological functions will be monitored as they inevitably cease," the hologram continued, its tone devoid of anything resembling malice or compassion. "No sustenance will be provided. This is in accordance with the starvation doctrine, which has been proven 100% effective against all 63 species the Imperium has brought to enlightenment." "Ha! Enlightenment? You mean you starved them all to death?" The Alarian hologram, which identified itself as Administrator 7, seemed to register the sound. A faint ripple crossed its smooth head. "Your species' grossly inefficient metabolic rate is well documented. Based on our analysis, your complete surrender to biological reality is expected within 3 of your standard days. We will observe your decline with great scientific interest." The hologram flickered and vanished, plunging them back into the humming, antiseptic silence. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The finality of the sentence settled over them, a cold, heavy blanket. 3 days. That wasn't a threat. It was a diagnosis. "Well," Gibson said, breaking the quiet as he pushed his massive frame to his feet, "I guess I'm dying hungry. I always knew it would end this way. I just thought it'd be because I left my wallet at a buffet." Maria was already on her feet, ignoring his gallows humor. Her engineer's eyes weren't seeing a prison. They were seeing a system, a flawed one. The ventilation grate was an older model, a retrofit, a sloppy patch job, a potential exit. "Gibson, give me a hand," she commanded, pointing to the grate. "Let's see what this glorified toaster oven cover is made of." Gibson, glad for a task, wedged his thick fingers into the narrow slits of the grate. Maria found purchase on the other side, her smaller, calloused hands gripping the cool metal. "On 3, she grunted. 1, 2, 3. They heaved. Gibson's muscles bunched, his back straining against the unyielding metal. A low groan echoed in the cell, a deep, resonant protest from the wall where the grate was anchored. The metal itself didn't bend, didn't flex, didn't even creak. It was an unfamiliar alloy, dark and dense. "Nothing," Gibson panted, letting go. His fingertips were red and raw. "It's like trying to bend a piece of a dreadnought's hull." Anika ran a finger along the grate's edge, her touch delicate. "Some kind of carbon matrix alloy. Tensile strength is probably astronomical. It's not decorative, it's structural. They built the wall around it." Maria stared at the grate, a muscle in her jaw tightening. Then her eyes swept the room again, cataloging every detail. An exit was out. That left, survival. Her lips twisted into a thin, grim smile that was more a snarl than an expression of humor. "They made 2 mistakes," Maria said, her voice hard and clear. Anika raised an eyebrow. "Only 2? I can count at least 5, starting with their interior decorator." "First," Maria said, her gaze now fixed on the faint, damp, earthy smell wafting from that same impassable grate. "They put us in an old part of the ship. This section is probably near the secondary cargo bay, right where they dragged Orlando's wreckage." "And the second mistake?" Gibson asked, a spark of genuine interest in his eyes. Maria's smile didn't reach her eyes. They were cold and sharp like chips of flint. "They told us we had 3 days to live." The first 24 hours were a brutal, grinding lesson in what true hunger felt like. It wasn't just a rumble in the stomach, it was a hollowing out of the soul, a creeping fog that settled in the brain and slowed every thought to a crawl. Gibson, usually a boundless font of boisterous energy and bad jokes, was reduced to pacing the cell in slow, sluggish circles, his huge frame seeming to shrink with every passing hour. He started telling stories about meals he'd eaten, his voice growing fainter with each recounted feast. Maria, however, wasn't pacing. She was hunting. Her mind, trained to dismantle fusion engines and bypass encrypted security systems, was now focused on dismantling their prison for parts. She ran her hands over every surface, tapping, listening for variations in density, searching for a single weak point. Anika, meanwhile, had found her own project. In the microscopic seam where the condensation pipe met the wall, something was growing. A dark, velvety patch of what looked like mold, no bigger than her thumbnail, was thriving in the perpetual dampness. "Fascinating," she murmured, scraping a tiny sample with her fingernail. She held it close to her eyes, studying its structure. A terrestrial fungus. A spore must have hitched a ride on our gear, probably from Gibson's boot. Constant condensation here has created a perfect microclimate for it to flourish. "Then we can eat it?" Gibson asked, his voice a low croak. He had stopped pacing and was now watching Anika with the focused intensity of a starving wolf spotting a three-legged rabbit. "Technically," Anika said, sniffing the sample, "its scent profile suggests damp earth, ammonia, and a hint of old socks, but it appears to be a protein-rich mycelial network. It will likely taste like dirt and piss, but it is technically nutritious." "I'll take it," Gibson said without a moment's hesitation. But their real breakthrough was a miracle of opportunity, a skittering testament to life's tenacity. A faint scratching sound had Maria's attention fixed on the vent. A moment later, a small, multi-legged creature with tough plating and twitching antennae scurried out. It was a skitter rat, a hardy vermin native to the blasted colony world they'd been captured on. It was ugly, it was probably diseased, but the ugly little thing was a piece of home. Before Maria or Anika could even react, Gibson moved. His sluggishness vanished, replaced by a shocking burst of predatory speed. He lunged, one of his massive hands slammed down over the creature. There was a faint, unsatisfying crunch. He peeled his hand back, revealing the twitching, stunned skitter rat. He looked down at it, then at the squad mates, a triumphant, almost feral grin spreading across his face. Appetizer. They had food. A small, twitching, probably poisonous appetizer. Now they had a new problem: cooking it. They needed heat. Maria's eyes went back to the service panel she had spotted earlier. It took Gibson's brute strength to pry a corner loose. Using a thin piece of metal, he had managed to break off the underside of his bunk frame. Inside were two thick insulated power conduits running in parallel, high voltage, a beautiful, deadly sight. "Okay," Maria said, her voice low and focused, the engineer in her taking over. "New plan. We're not making an arc. We're making a stove." She had Gibson strip the insulation off a small section of each conduit, exposing the gleaming metal beneath. "This is an old system. The breakers will be sluggish, designed to handle minor power fluctuations. We'll have maybe 30 seconds before they trip and the whole conduit goes dead for an hour." Gibson had already sharpened the metal shard from the bunk frame on the floor. "So we cook fast." "Exactly." Maria took the shard. "We're going to wedge this between the positive and negative leads. You'll create a direct short. The resistance in the shard should make it heat up like a toaster element, if we're lucky." "And if we're not lucky?" Anika asked, observing the procedure with clinical curiosity. "Then it either melts, explodes, or welds itself to the conduits, and we never get to try this again," Maria replied flatly. "Gibson, get the rat ready. Anika, be ready to knock the shard loose if it starts to melt." With painstaking slowness, her hands steady, Maria wedged the metal shard between the two exposed conduits. For a second, nothing happened. Then the lights in the cell dimmed perceptibly. A low, angry hum emanated from the wall. The metal shard began to glow, first a dull gray, then a cherry red, then a brilliant, searing orange that cast flickering shadows on their determined faces. "Now!" Maria hissed. Gibson thrust the impelled skitter rat against the glowing hot metal. There was an immediate sizzle, a sharp pop, and a thin curl of smoke rose, carrying a smell that was alien and strange, but undeniably the scent of cooking meat. They worked in frantic, silent coordination, turning the creature, searing its flesh against the crude heating element. After 20 seconds that felt like an eternity, the hum from the wall cut out with a loud clunk. The shard's angry glow faded back to gray. They had done it. They had a piece of cooked meat no bigger than a man's fist. It was charred on the outside and probably raw in the middle, but it was the most beautiful thing any of them had ever seen. A visceral, messy, glorious scent of defiance in a sterile, hopeless place. In his pristine laboratory, light years away from the concept of a barbecue, Hestian stared at a holographic display, feeling a deep intellectual revulsion that bordered on nausea. The results from Containment Alpha's gut biome samples were in, and they were a blasphemy against the clean, simple laws of efficient biology.
Symbiotic cesspool,
He muttered to Peer, who was dutifully logging the data with a stylus that never touched the screen.
Look at this. Thousands of distinct microbial species, all competing and cooperating in a chaotic, unregulated soup. It's the biological equivalent of using a sledgehammer to open a data chip. It's a riot in a petri dish.
His simulations, based on the samples, were even more disturbing. They suggested the biome could break down complex polymers, cellulose, chitin, even certain plastics, with remarkable, if grotesquely messy, efficiency. It wasn't a digestive system. It was a rogue bioreactor. A minor alert, a soft, unobtrusive chime sounded from his secondary console. He glanced at it, irritated by the interruption. Atmospheric anomaly detected, sector gamma 9. He magnified the report. Unidentified organic particulates, elevated carbon dioxide, trace methane, all localized to the detention block. He didn't dismiss it. A true scientist cataloged all data, no matter how anomalous or unpleasant. He opened a new log entry, his long fingers dancing across the holographic keys.
Fascinating,
He murmured, a flicker of intellectual curiosity momentarily overriding his disgust.
Hypothesis. The Terran decomposition process is unexpectedly volatile. As the live subject's cellular structures break down from nutrient deprivation, they are off-gassing complex organic compounds, a fascinating new data point on their systemic failure. The very air around them is evidence of their decay.
He filed the report under terminal stage biomarkers and turned his full attention back to the main console, pulling up the live biofeed from the prisoner's cell. He was eager to watch the elegant, predictable process of starvation unfold. The data stream showed exactly what he expected. Decreased metabolic rates, elevated stress hormones, intermittent REM sleep. The curve was trending perfectly towards systemic collapse. He settled in, ready to watch nature in its infinite efficiency correct a messy biological error. 3 days passed, then 5, then 7. The Aularians' official timeline for the humans' demise came and went, unmarked and uncelebrated. Inside the cell, a grim but effective routine had been established. They managed to catch one more skitter rat on day 4, and then the vent fell silent. The miracle buffet had closed for business. Their diet now consisted of 2 primary food groups, mold and wall. The mold patch, carefully cultivated by Anika, like a prize-winning orchid, had spread along the condensation pipe. They harvested in tiny controlled amounts, which Anika referred to as their vitamin and protein supplement. Gibson called it pipe cheese.
That's pipe cheese.
But the true staple of their diet was the insulation from the power conduit. After their second rat, Mariah had wondered what the fibrous pale yellow material was made of. A quick, desperate taste test confirmed it was not just fire retardant, but also, in a very desperate sort of way, edible. Anika had analyzed it by chewing a small piece for several minutes, her expression thoughtful. Cellulose-based biopolymer, she had declared after swallowing. Tastes like despair. To our gut biome, it's basically just cardboard. Highly processed inorganic cardboard. So they ate the wall. It was chalky and dry, a compressed dust that made their gums feel raw and scraped their throats on the way down. But it was something. It was fuel. Gibson, gaunt but strangely wired, tore off strips with his bare hands. After a week of this diet, the sluggish weakness of the first few days was gone, replaced by a wiry, coiled energy, the lean efficiency of a predator in a time of famine. Maria watched him tear into a fresh strip of insulation with a grimace. You're looking less like a corpse and more like a cornered wolf, Gibson. Gibson grunted, chewing with a rhythmic grinding of his jaw.
Yeah, cornered wolves get to eat. Tastes better than nothing. Kind of like a very, very stale biscuit.
Their cell, once a monument to Alarian sterility, had transformed. The air had a permanent faint haze of ozone and something damply organic. A small, neat pile of skitterrat bones was stacked in one corner. The insulation around the power conduit was visibly shredded, exposing more of the gleaming metal beneath. It was no longer a prison. It was a den. Chief Exosurgeon Hestian was reviewing the data for the 10th time, his four-jointed fingers drumming a frantic, silent rhythm on the edge of his console. His impatience was curdling into a more corrosive emotion, confusion. The subjects were stubbornly refusing to follow the proper curve of decline. Their biosigns were all wrong. Their heart rates were stable. Their core temperatures were normal. Their waste output was consistent. Frustrated, he switched from his elegant charts and graphs to the high-fidelity video feed, something he rarely did. Staring at the crude organisms for extended periods was aesthetically displeasing. He zoomed in, his scientific mind desperately searching for the signs of decay he knew must be there. He found them immediately, or so he told himself. He watched as Maria methodically tore off a strip of the conduit insulation and began chewing it, her expression one of grim determination.
Excellent,
Hestian murmured, making a note.
The pica has set in. A clear neurological symptom of terminal malnutrition. They're consuming inedible material, a final instinctual madness driven by a starving brain.
He saw Gibson pacing the cell, not sluggishly, but with a restless predatory energy. His large frame coiled like a spring.
A final burst of predator instinct.
Hestian logged, his confidence growing with each flawed observation.
The body is consuming its own muscle tissue for a last pointless expenditure of energy before total systemic failure. A classic sign.
He saw Anika scraping the disgusting mold culture into a small, neat pile. He saw the tiny stack of clean-picked bones in the corner. He saw it all, and he saw it all through the perfect, unassailable lens of his own genius and established doctrine. Every action they took to survive, he interpreted as a symptom of their impending death. His scientific mind didn't just reel, it built a fortress of flawed logic around a core of absolute certainty. He was not just observing, he was creating a narrative. And his narrative, the humans were already dead. They were just too primitive to lie down. It was only when Administrator Seven contacted him, its synthesized voice tight with something that might have been revulsion.
Exosurgeon, their waste output has remained consistent. This contradicts all 63 prior deprivation models.
That a tiny crack appeared in Hestian's fortress. Consistent waste output meant consistent energy intake. It was a biological impossibility, a violation of thermodynamic principles. For the first time in his long, distinguished career, Hestian felt a flicker of genuine doubt, a cold, unpleasant sensation that he immediately suppressed. The model was not wrong. The subjects were simply anomalous. Anika decided it was time for a science lesson. She took a sharpened rat bone and began to scratch a diagram into the metal floor of the cell, the sound sharp and grating in the quiet. All right, listen up. she said, her voice filled with a strange academic excitement that was entirely at odds with their grim surroundings. The Aularians made a fundamental species-level error. They looked at all biology and saw nothing but flaws. They saw this. She drew a long, coiling, ridiculously complex series of loops on the floor.
Our digestive tract.
Gibson grunted, recognizing the shape from his own basic biology training.
Ugly sucker, isn't it? Looks like a drop plate of noodles.
To an Aularian, whose entire digestive process is a single, elegant organ the size of my fist, this is a nightmare of inefficiency.
Anika explained, tapping the drawing with her bone stylus.
All ridiculously long intestines, the very thing that surgeon probably found so bizarre and horrifying, exist for one reason: to maximize nutrient absorption from low-quality, difficult-to-digest food. We evolved as omnivorous scavengers. We were designed to eat whatever we could find: roots, bugs, carrion, week-old leftovers, you name it.
She pointed to a spot deep inside the coils.
And in here, we have our secret weapon, our gut bacteria. Trillions of them. An entire civilization of microorganisms that have evolved with us. That biome can break down complex fibers like the cellulose in that insulation, things that would pass right through an Aularian, or more likely, kill them from the inside out.
Maria stared at the diagram, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across her face.
So, our biggest biological weakness is the reason we're still alive,
Anika finished, her eyes gleaming with intellectual fire.
Their biology is a high-performance racing engine. It needs pure, refined fuel. It's powerful, but it's brittle. One bad tank of gas, and the whole thing seizes up. Our biology is a rugged, all-terrain diesel engine. It's messy, it's loud, and it smells bad, but you can run it on damn near anything.
They finally understood. Their supposed biological inferiority wasn't a flaw, it was a feature. It was a rugged, unstoppable engine of survival, cobbled together by millennia of desperation. They were weak, yes, but their stamina was a deep, untapped well. And the Aularians, in all their sterile perfection, had no idea. Hestian was staring at the anatomical chart from the autopsy of contaminant Alpha when a priority communication request chimed, sharp and demanding. He accepted it. A shimmering, featureless silver ovoid appeared on his holo display, the sigil of a high command administrator. This was not Administrator 7. This was higher.
Exosurgeon?
A cold, synthesized voice intoned, each word a perfectly formed crystal of ice.
Your deprivation study is on its 8th cycle. The doctrine predicted systemic failure by cycle 3. Explain this discrepancy.
Hestian felt a chill that settled deep in his bones, a cold that had nothing to do with the station's temperature. This was an audit, a career-ending, potentially life-ending audit.
The subjects are anomalously resilient, High Administrator,
he stammered, his carefully modulated voice wavering for the first time in decades.
Their biology is proving more complex than our initial models anticipated.
The ovoid on the screen seemed to narrow, an impressive feat for a featureless shape.
Complexity is another word for inefficiency, exosurgeon. The starvation doctrine is built on the universal constant of metabolic requirement. There are no anomalies, only failures in observation. Your task is to document failure, not catalog absurdities.
The voice dropped, becoming even colder.
Provide a definitive result. The Imperium has no use for inconclusive studies. Reconfirm the doctrine, or your project and all associated personnel will be re-evaluated for continued utility.
The transmission cut, leaving Hestian standing frozen in the silent lab. The weight of the implied threat pressed down on him, a physical pressure in his chest. He was no longer a scientist on the cusp of a fascinating discovery. He was a functionary on the verge of being declared redundant. The abstract academic horror he felt had now curdled into something far more personal and primal. Fear. He needed a result. He needed the humans to die. Now. The routine had worn them down. Not physically. The steady stream of low-grade calories from the wall and the pipe cheese kept their bodies functioning, but mentally. The endless gray walls, the recycled air that always tasted faintly of metal, the constant gnawing hunger for something that actually tasted like food. They sat huddled together, the meager warmth of their bodies a small comfort against the cold metal floor. The conversation turned, as it almost always did when morale hit rock bottom, to home. "First thing I'm getting," Gibson said, his voice a low, reverent rumble that seemed to come from the center of the earth, "is a double bacon cheeseburger from Fat Tony's on Orbital Station Epsilon. A beautiful, disgustingly inefficient stack of fat and protein, so greasy the back turns see-through, with curly fries, the kind that are 50% crisp and 50% soft, and a chocolate shake so thick you have to eat it with a spoon for the first 10 minutes. Anika offered a small, tired smile.
"A perfect bowl of tonkatsu ramen from that little place in Neo-Tokyo Sector 4. The one that's just a counter with 6 stools. The one that uses a needlessly complex 2-day process just to make the broth. The pork belly's so tender, it dissolves on your tongue. The perfectly soft-boiled egg. The fresh noodles with just the right amount of chew."
They both looked at Maria. She was quiet for a long moment, staring at the gray wall as if she could see through it.
"Coffee,"
she said finally, her voice soft but firm as Durasteel.
"Real coffee. From freshly ground beans, probably from some backwater colony that still grows it in actual dirt. Black, a crude, bitter, over-extracted infusion. So strong you can taste the color. Hot enough to scald my tongue. I want to sit down with a hot cup of black coffee and a technical manual for a new model of fusion core."
For a moment, they weren't prisoners. There were 3 hungry people dreaming of the complex, messy, inefficient, and wonderful things that made life worth living. The dream wasn't a comfort, it was a weapon. It sharpened the dull edges of their resolve into a razor's edge. Maria pushed herself to her feet, the quiet moment of reflection over. "All right," she said, her voice hard as forged steel. "Dream time's over. We've survived. Now, it's time to fight." Maria's plan was simple, brutal, and hinged on exploiting the Ilarians' profound arrogance. They needed the guards to enter the cell. They needed them to break their own sterile protocols.
"They think we're dying,"
she explained, her voice a low whisper.
"Hestian needs us to be dying. It's not just a scientific observation for him anymore. It's a professional necessity. We're going to give him the performance of a lifetime."
During the next scheduled observation cycle, as they knew Hestian would be watching his precious data streams, Gibson took center stage. He let out a low, agonized groan that sounded genuinely convincing and collapsed to the floor. Then he began to convulse, his powerful limbs thrashing against the metal. For the final grotesque touch, Anika had him chew up a mouthful of their dark green mold paste. He began to froth at the mouth, a sickening mixture of saliva and green-black spores dribbling down his chin onto the pristine floor. In his lab, Hestian watched, his heart pounding in his chest. This was it.
The terminal seizure he had been waiting for, the one his models had predicted. The data streams on his console went wild, a chaotic symphony of distress signals and biological error codes that confirmed his diagnosis. The doctrine was correct. His career was saved. His life was no longer forfeit.
Get in there!
He commanded the 2 guards stationed outside the cell, his voice strained with an almost manic urgency.
Attach the portable bioscanners. I need to record every second of this organism's termination for the Hyde administration.
Sir, quarantine protocols forbid, one of the guards began, its synthesized voice hesitant.
Override them!
Estienne snapped, his academic calm completely shattered.
That is a direct order from a chief exosurgeon. I need that data now!
His desperation had overridden decades of ingrained caution. The guards, bound by the rigid chains of hierarchy, had no choice. They exchanged a brief, hesitant glance, then manually unlocked the cell door. The sterile seal was broken with a soft hiss of escaping atmosphere. The 2 Alarian guards stepped into the cell. The air, thick with the smell of ozone, unwashed human, and something vaguely fungal, was a physical assault on their refined senses. One knelt beside Gibson's still convulsing form, a portable scanner in its hand. The other stood watch, its posture radiating discomfort. Then Gibson's seizure stopped abruptly. He exploded upwards, his hand shot out and grabbed the kneeling guard's arm, while his other arm wrapped around its torso in a bone-crunching bear hug. There was a sickening crack as the guard's sleek, elegant armor fractured under the raw, brute force. Simultaneously, Maria and Anika launched themselves at the second guard. Maria went low, tackling its long, slender legs and driving it off balance. Anika, surprisingly fast, drove the sharpened rat bone deep into the exposed seam of its elbow joint. The guard grunted in surprise and pain, stumbling backward. The standing guard recovered its balance and swung its stun baton in a clean, efficient arc. Gibson didn't try to block it. He took the blow on his shoulder with a grunt of pain, the impact deadened by sheer muscle mass, and used the moment to drive his own fist into the Alarian's narrow sternum. For the first 30 seconds, the Alarian's superior speed and strength were overwhelming. They moved in blurry, efficient strikes, each one aimed at a nerve cluster or joint. But then a subtle shift occurred. A faint tremor appeared in the limbs of the guard struggling against Maria and Anika. Its movements became fractionally slower. Its energy reserves, designed for short, decisive engagements that ended in a clean victory, were depleting at an alarming rate. In contrast, the humans, bruised and battered, were just hitting their stride. They fought with a grinding, relentless momentum born of desperation and a week's worth of slow-burning garbage. They didn't have the Alarian's explosive power, but they could just keep going. The fight ended in less than a minute. Gibson finally squeezed the air from his opponent, which slumped unconscious to the floor. Maria used the second Alarian's own stun baton against it, sending it crumpling in a heap. The cell was silent, save for the ragged, panting breaths of 3 humans. They were bruised, bleeding, and utterly exhausted. But they were armed, and they were free. Estienne watched the chaos unfold on his monitors, a wave of cold terror washing over him that was so profound it felt like a physical immersion in ice water. The data streams he had been watching with such desperation had flatlined as the portable scanners were smashed against a metal wall.
Containment failed!
He screamed into his comms unit, his voice a high-pitched shriek of panic that bore no resemblance of his usual modulated tones.
The Terran subjects are loose! They're ambulatory bioreactors! A walking plague of inefficiency!
He fumbled to send a ship-wide security alert. His frantic gaze fell on the secondary screen he'd left open, the one still displaying the 3D anatomical model from the autopsy of Containment Alpha. The image of the ridiculously long, coiled human intestine rotated slowly, mockingly, a silent testament to his own monumental ignorance. And in a moment of horrifying, soul-shattering clarity, the pieces clicked into place. The blasphemous gut biome, the consumption of inedible waste, the atmospheric anomalies, their infuriating endurance. It wasn't inefficiency.
It was resilience. Horrific, messy, foul, indomitable resilience. A system designed not for a perfect, sterile world, but to survive any world. To eat the rocks and the dirt and the garbage and turn it into fuel for a machine that simply refused to die. The entire foundation of his science, his career, his species' philosophy of biological perfection crumbled into dust.
No one told us.
He whispered, the words catching in his throat as a single, devastating truth burned through his mind, cauterizing his arrogance. He finally understood the purpose of that absurdly long, obscene organ.
It wasn't a flaw. It was the whole point.
Fighting their way through the ship was a series of ugly, desperate brawls in narrow maintenance corridors and antiseptic service tunnels. They followed the ship's schematics they'd pulled from a fallen guard's datapad, heading deep into the vessel's industrial underbelly. Finally, they burst through a pressure door into a vast maintenance hangar. The air smelled of ozone, industrial lubricants, and the cold, dead scent of vacuum-rated metal. And there it was. A squat, ugly utilitarian freighter docked in a maintenance cradle. The lettering on its side read Debris Collector 9. It was the most beautiful thing Maria had ever seen.
That's all right.
She panted, leading the charge up the ramp, leaving a trail of grime on the pristine metal. She slid into the pilot's seat, which was surprisingly comfortable, and hit the main power switch. The lights flickered on, but the engine remained stubbornly silent. A diagnostic message flashed on the main screen in the elegant, flowing Alarian script, which Anika quickly translated.
Biorefined power core depleted. Power-grade fuel required for ignition sequence.
They were trapped. The ship had no fuel. From the corridor behind them, the sharp, rhythmic clamping of magnetic boots grew louder, an approaching storm of retribution. Maria didn't see a dead end. She saw a system with a faulty input. She was out of the cockpit in a flash, a wild, desperate, and utterly insane idea blooming in her mind. She ran to the side of the ship and ripped open a maintenance panel revealing a large cylindrical unit labeled Organic Waste Reclamation Unit, the ship's garbage disposal. Her grimy fingers traced its thick power conduits. They didn't go into the main drive. They went to a secondary power regulation system, right next to the massive ignition capacitor for the engine. A manic, feral grin spread across her face.
Their systems are pure,
she panted, her voice giddy with the thrill of impending catastrophic engineering.
They're designed for a clean energy spike to jumpstart the engine, a single, perfect, musical note.
She slapped the reclamation unit.
We're going to hit this capacitor with the electrical equivalent of a mudslide, a chaotic, filthy surge of raw, dirty power. It's so far outside their design parameters, their safety systems won't even know how to react. It's either going to work, or it's going to detonate this entire deck.
She turned to her squad, her eyes blazing with a fire that seemed to light up the dim hangar.
Anika, I need every single bit of organic crap you can find. Gibson, get me more rats, and anything else they'll burn.
What followed was a frantic, desperate symphony of chaos. Gibson became a one-man demolition crew, tearing through the maintenance hangar with a joyous abandon of a man who had been eating wall insulation for a week. He ripped out bundles of a different, more flammable type of insulation. He smashed open storage crates, finding packages of Alarian's bland nutrient paste, which they unceremoniously dumped into the hopper as a binder. He kicked over maintenance bins, finding greasy rags and tubs of industrial lubricant. Anika, with surprising speed, scraped a thick green algae from a leaky water tank and gathered armfuls of a different kind of mold she found growing behind a loose panel. They dumped everything into the reclamation unit's wide hopper. Skitter rat carcasses they found in the hangar's corners, insulation, fungi, algae, grease-soaked rags, even the bodies of the Alarian guards they dragged with them.
"They're at the door!"
Gibson yelled, bracing his bulk against the hangar entrance as the metal began to buckle inward from the other side.
Buy me a minute, Gibson!
Maria screamed back, her hands a blur of motion. She found the main power junction box next to the capacitor. Using a heavy wrench she had found, she pried the cover off with a screech of protesting metal. Inside were thick, copper-colored bus bars, gleaming and pure. She grabbed the heavy, rerouted cables from the reclamation unit. Sparks flew as she physically clamped the raw cable ends onto the capacitor's main bus bars. It was a crude, brutal connection, and an insult to every principle of Valerian engineering. The capacitor began to whine, a low hum that rose and pitched to a terrified scream. It glowed a dangerous, overstressed cherry red. The hangar door buckled, a gap appearing at the edge, a silver Valerian arm reaching through. "It's now or never!" Gibson bellowed, shoving the arm back out. With a final, desperate prayer to the god of broken machines and bad ideas, Maria slammed a massive, jury-rigged bypass lever into place. The debris collector 9 lurched to life with a sound like a giant cosmic belch. It was a stubborn brick of a ship, its prow heavily reinforced for deflecting orbital debris. Thick, foul-smelling black and green smoke poured from its engines. The entire ship shuddered violently, then shot forward, smashing through its docking clamps with a sound like thunder. Maria wrestled with the controls, pointing the garbage scale's blunt nose at the hangar doors. They burst outward in a shower of twisted metal, just as a sleek Alarian patrol cutter, a razor blade of a ship named the Inevitable Truth, moved into position to investigate the commotion. The cutter was at point-blank range, its superior long-range plasma cannons useless. Its captain stared out of the main view screen in utter frozen disbelief as the ugly, smoking freighter accelerated directly at them. It was a tactic so crude, so primitive, it wasn't in any of their simulators. It was the tactical equivalent of a bar fight. Maria had only one goal: boarding. "Hold on to something!" She screamed, her knuckles white on the controls. The impact was catastrophic. A deafening, world-ending shriek of tearing metal threw them all against their restraints. Alarms blared from both ships. The debris collector 9's reinforced prow plowed deep into the cutter's slender frame, creating a jagged, sparking, and barely survivable breach between the two vessels. The fight for the inevitable truth was a brutal, close-quarters affair. The three humans covered in grime and grease stormed through the breach like vengeful ghosts. Gibson used a detached hull plate as a makeshift shield and battering ram, clearing a path through the dazed and disoriented Alarian crew. They were warriors trained for clean, orderly combat at a distance, and they were psychologically unprepared for this level of feral, face-to-face violence. The humans were relentless, their stamina the decisive weapon. They fought their way to the bridge, a whirlwind of desperate, ugly, and effective violence. They took the bridge, secured the ship, and sealed the pressure doors behind them, leaving their broken, garbage-fueled escape vessel still embedded in the side of their new prize, like a dirty fork stuck in a piece of cake. Standing victorious on the bridge of their captured vessel, the squad took a moment to breathe. Their ship was silent except for the ragged breathing and the faint antiseptic hum of superior Alarian technology. The view screen showed the star-dusted blackness of deep space. Gibson, true to form, immediately located the ship's nutrient paste dispenser. He activated it, and a small, perfectly uniform cylinder of beige paste was extruded. He poked it, then scooped a small amount onto his finger. He tasted it, and his face immediately contorted into an expression of profound, soul-deep disgust.
Tastes like sad plastic,
he announced, spitting it onto the pristine floor with a wet smack.
Ha!
He reached into a pouch on his belt and pulled out a small, blackened object he had saved, the cooked leg of a skitter rat. He took a satisfying, crunchy bite. He chewed thoughtfully for a moment, his eyes half closed in bliss.
Nah,
he said to no one in particular, holding up the rat leg as if for inspection.
Needs salt.
Leaning heavily against the captain's chair, Maria let out a choked, ragged sound that might have been a laugh. For the first time in weeks, a rare, genuine smile touched her grimy face. She looked at her crew, at the controls of her new ship, and began plotting a course for the nearest Terran Alliance outpost, leaving behind a baffled and terrified enemy who had just received a very messy, very smelly, and very overdue lesson in the sublime, indomitable inefficiency of human biology.